Great job, Sean. His song just reminded me of an announcement I was probably supposed to make to you guys probably a month ago. Oops, because I was taking myself too seriously and being scared to death. At the Centers for Spiritual Living annual convention this year, myself and Dr. Roger Teal will be the closing night keynote speakers. And and so I've just been, not lightening up about it. Very, this is my next big step. And but they told me to invite everyone, all my congregation, anybody who wants to come. You can come Thursday night, March 7th, Thursday night. Like, who can come anywhere on a Thursday night, right? But if you can come on Thursday night to Seaside Center for Spiritual Living, where a lot of you have come down there for graduations and different things. So if you want to come to support, come to support. But that's really exciting and nerve-wracking. So I'm going to lighten up about it and just know that it's all good. Okay, so this last week I heard a really powerful story about a man who stood before God, and his heart was breaking because of the pain and injustice in the world. And he cried out, "Dear God, look at what's going on all around you. The anguish, the pain, the suffering. It's too much. Why don't you send help?" And God whispered, "I did send help. I sent you. I sent you." And this month we've been journeying on this adventure of seeking the common good. Seeking the common good. And last week we had an opportunity to open up to the awareness of what is the common good. Recognizing that there is an intrinsic oneness about each and every one of us, that we are so interconnected, that who we are, what we are, how we think and feel has an effect on everyone. And to take one steep step deeper, this morning we'll be discussing compassion and justice for all. And we've been looking at this book called Beyond Religion, An Ethics for a Whole World by His Holiness the Dalai Lama. And in talking about compassionate justice, the Dalai Lama says that many people are in conflict within themselves about the principle of compassion implying forgiveness, and the exercise of justice being punishment for wrongdoing. But the truth is that in consciousness and in truth, compassion is our concern for another's suffering. It is our concern for another's suffering. And justice is the quality of being fair and reasonable. The quality of being fair and reasonable and having concern for the suffering of others, to me, goes hand in hand. It comes together to support the vision of awakening humanity to its spiritual magnificence, of creating a world that works for everyone. And so Reverend Michael and I, when we were discussing how we would split the talk, he called dibs on the justice part. He's like, "I get justice." I said, "Okay, not a problem. I love compassion. I love any availability or call into my heart to develop more compassion is absolutely needed, desired, and welcomed." So this morning, we're going to talk about something called universal compassion. Universal compassion is rooted in the idea that there is a simple awareness that each and every one of us has two things in common. that every one of us has two things in common, and those two things are that we all desire to be happy and that none of us desire to suffer. We all desire to be happy, and no one desires to suffer. And that's across the board, around the world. And so universal compassion is the understanding that we can create a space within us for care and concern of the welfare of all of our human family, not just the people closest to us. But you know, something happens sometimes, I don't know about you, but when I'm trying to show care or compassion for someone that I don't know, sometimes I'm met with resistance and cruelty. Have you ever tried to show care for someone and they totally just either didn't get it or were mean or were, and I don't know why that happens. But we build a wall sometimes when that happens, and we say, okay, I'm sticking to my inner circle. I'm just sticking to the people who I know are not going to hurt me or are not going to push back on me, right? But genuine compassion, remember this, if you remember nothing else. Genuine compassion is compassion not for a person's behavior, but for the person themselves. Genuine compassion is not for a person's behavior. We do not have to agree with the way that a person acts and moves and thinks and bees in the world. But we can still have compassion, concern for another's suffering, care for another being themselves, the human that they are. And so I want to share a story with you that I thought was really sweet, and it reminded me of this idea of universal compassion, strangers coming together and supporting one another. And there is this article that I read about a man, it's a true story, about a man named Bud Caldwell. And he had just lost his wife of 55 years. And what he decided to do is he decided to dedicate in memory of her a park bench. It was in a beautiful park, and every single day this man brought daisies to her park bench. And he would sit there and he would remember her. Every single day. And the neighborhood started to notice, and the park workers began to notice, and they thought, how beautiful, how wonderful of this man, how devoted. Until winter came, and the sidewalks got slick and slippery, and the snow had filled the entire park. Bud would still come and drive into the snowbank and try to get as close as he could to the bench. And he still had the daisies in his car waiting. And he did this every single day until these two park workers, city workers, they noticed that he kept coming and he kept coming, even though there was no way that he was going to get to this bench. And so because of the compassion in their heart and because of the devotion they saw in him, they thought, you know what? The right thing to do here is to shovel the walkway for him. And every single day they began to shovel the walkway just for him. Nobody else was planning on coming out in this freezing cold weather to a park filled with snow and ice, just for him. And he came out of his truck one day and he saw that it was cleared away so he could get to his bench. And he goes, my knees about buckled underneath me. I was so overwhelmed with joy and kindness. He said, it took my breath away. And so he found those workers, those city workers, and he said, why did you do this for me? And Kevin, one of them, he said, we just felt like it was the right thing to do. He said, we had some intuition or divine calling, or call it what you'd like, that just said, this is what you're meant to do. This is what you're here for, to help somebody out. And I just thought, that is a really sweet demonstration of universal compassion. It's kind of like the movement of paying it forward, right? Having compassion for others, not needing to know who they are or where they come from, but giving of ourselves and caring for others. But then there's even when we can get to that point where we can care for people who we don't know in a sweet and kind and loving way like that, that's one thing. That's an immense thing. But then there's an even deeper level of universal compassion, a harder level that really pulls at our soul and has us really think and contemplate this idea. And I want to share with you something that Dr. Martin Luther King said in A Time to Break the Silence. He said, "Here is the true meaning and value of compassion and nonviolence. When it helps us to see the enemy's point of view, to hear his questions, to know his assessment of ourselves. For from his view, we may indeed see the basic weakness of our own condition. And if we are mature, we may learn to grow and profit from the wisdom of the brothers who call themselves the opposition." I want to read this one more time because I just think, King is so powerful. He's so powerful. "Here is the true meaning and value of compassion and nonviolence. When it helps us to see the enemy's point of view, to hear his questions, to know his assessment of ourselves. For from his viewpoint, we may indeed see the basic weakness of our own condition. And if we are mature, we may learn and grow and profit from the wisdom of the brothers who call themselves the opposition." This is very hard, very beautiful, very deep, but very hard practice of universal compassion, of standing strong enough in who we are to be willing to look at how someone else, who we may feel like has completely opposing views as we do, who has completely opposing ideas on everything, and to be able to look at their past and to be able to look at their childhood and look at the ideas that they were brought up with and the reason they are the way they are today. And it doesn't mean that we have to buy into it. It doesn't mean we have to begin to agree with them. What it means is that we open ourselves up to care for the suffering of others no matter what line they stand on. No matter if they are like us or not. And especially if they are the complete opposite of everything that we believe in. We must remember that we are one. And this is a very evolved spiritual practice, but King, he was like that, right? So it's not for the weak of heart, and it's not for the weak of mind. But it is for us to remember, if we choose to cultivate this kind of immense universal compassion, that within the divine mind, it can hold all viewpoints. That there's like 7 billion people on this planet, give or take a few, and the divine holds all of ours within its mind, all of us. And the divine body is the body of God in life. And the divine expression is the expression of us when we speak truth, truth with a capital T. When we speak our word of truth, and we know that we are standing in the midst of the good. And when we speak our words of justice and fairness and equity in this life, we begin to reveal the good around us. We begin to be the light for all of those to seek the way. When we live our lives and create a space of compassion in our hearts, we are the living embodiment of spirit. And so my prayer for us this morning, let's just close our eyes and move into prayer. My prayer for us this morning is that we move beyond our comfort zone, that we move beyond our identification of us and them, and we bridge the gap to we. We move beyond us and them, and we bridge the gap to we through immeasurable loving kindness and immeasurable universal compassion for all beings everywhere. And what I know and recognize and feel and sense right here and now is that we live and move in this divine life. We live and breathe and have our being in this thing called God, in this thing called spirit. all of us, every one of us, no matter how different we look or speak or think or act. When good is present, good is noticed. And when compassion is cultivated, lives are healed. And this is what I know to be true about God. And so it is. And so it is. Thank you, everybody. Reverend Michael.
Thank you. Can I get someone to turn that heater off? Thank you. And thank you for that wonderful message on compassion, Reverend Nicole. It was very moving. And so I get to talk about justice. So before I start, though, I need to ask this question right, because I didn't ask 9 o'clock right. So how many of you are enjoying the day after the rain? The sky's clear, the sun's shining, it's a blue sky outside. I asked at 9 o'clock, how many of you guys are enjoying the weather? No one really picked up on that. And I'm enjoying it immensely. So we had a very special trip yesterday. Reverend Nicole and 3 of our practitioners made a journey up to see my good friend Scott Olson, who's now the senior minister at the Ohio Center for Spiritual Living. And the trip was to hatch our latest professional licensed practitioner. So I'm happy to announce that the result of that trip, Judy Heileman, is now a formal licensed practitioner with the Centers for Spiritual Living worldwide, with I'm sure, over 5 years of study, because that's about what it takes. But the reason I'm bringing this up, because all 4 of us that were in my car, we were driving up the 605. The sun was shining. It was a beautiful blue sky. The mountains were just covered with snow, and we were saying, how glorious it is. Isn't California a great place to live, or what? Wow. So I want to talk about justice, and maybe some of you are saying, oh, good, Reverend Michael finally gets to speak about justice. We finally get to laugh at all the people that have been making fun of us, our Christian brothers and sisters, saying we're woo-woo. And he's going to tell us that there's this great universal law that all it knows is whatever we think, whatever we act, whatever we do, it returns to us in our life that experience. And we don't have to do anything. So a person that has been making fun of us will get theirs. A person that has been treating other people will get theirs. And we can just sit with some popcorn and enjoy it. I could say that, and actually that would all be true, because there's some truths in that picture, but I don't want to. What I want to bring to this message is the message that we always bring. If we bring our wonderful teaching of embedding God and Spirit in everything we do, we're much to the better of it. And our book is a book on ethics. I love ethics, and I love the Dalai Lama, the way he said it. He said this about justice. He said, nothing in the principle of compassion, which he defines as the wish to see others relieved of suffering, invokes surrendering to the misdeeds of others. In other words, you don't have to just bow down and take it because a person is misacting. But he also defines justice this way. He says it's a universal principle of fairness based on our fundamental equality as human beings. And he addresses this. He says a lot of religions, one he groups as theism, and that's just the Christian religion, and the Muslim religion would be in there. They get justice in the afterlife. And that's what they hold against people to behave ethically. And he even gets at his own religion, Buddhism. He says, we do a bit of the same thing. We talk about the karmic cycle. And so if we do things in one life, we have to be reborn and go through it again. But the spiritual principle that I want to bring to this conversation of justice is this spiritual principle of bringing the life of Spirit, the life of God, into a situation where you don't normally see it. And I love to talk about what distinguishes us is we like these golden threads of truth that weave their way through all the different spiritual traditions and religions. And this one about putting Spirit in the midst of conflict has a long path to come to us. It came to us 2,500 years ago through one of my favorite Hindu scriptures, the Bhagavad Gita. And the different thing about the Bhagavad Gita is it's a spiritual scripture. It's not set on a mountaintop in a holy, serene place. The Bhagavad Gita all unfolds in the midst of a battlefield, the entire story. And so what happens through these threads of truth, they get passed on, as Reverend Nicole has talked about, keeping this eternal flame going. And the keeper of the flame, that's the way our truths are. And so we got that 2,500 years ago. It's a beautiful work. And so then about the middle of the 1800s, a man by the name of Henry David Thoreau picked up on it and wrote extensively on it. And so he picked this flame up, he tweaked it a little bit, and now it was there for others to pick up. And then a man by the name of Mahatma Gandhi picked up on it. And I'm going to come back to what Gandhi did with it. But so he tweaked it, he put it out there, and Gandhi was very influential to a very special person. And that person was Martin Luther King. So Martin Luther King picked up on it too. And Martin Luther King in the civil rights movement had a very powerful person that did a lot of work too. His name was Howard Thurman. So this great truth about bringing the life of Spirit in the midst of a battle, really we got a lot from it. And so what Gandhi did is Gandhi read the Bhagavad Gita every day of his life. He didn't skip a day. And he picked up on this old Hindu tradition called Satyagraha. And what it means is fighting injustice by clinging to the truth. So instead of fanning hatred with hatred, you fan hatred with love. Instead of providing contempt to you with contempt to them, you take contempt and return respect. And he said, it's all about holding on to truth no matter how mighty the storm is. And Gandhi has a concept, he's talked about taking himself to zero, meaning getting his ego out of it. And when he got his ego out of it, then he could take the teaching and champion it and speak the word of Spirit in the midst of conflict, returning that love no matter what it went. And he created this concept. He didn't create it. He used this Hindu concept called ahimsa, which is nonviolence. And he tells us it's more than the absence of violence. It's the presence of justice and love in the face of the fiercest of provocations. And the one thing that he always told his people is never, ever forget the attacker and those that are being attacked are one. They come from the same place. So he spoke with power, with authority, this presence of love in the midst of turmoil. And from this movement, there's some great quotes that came out of it. Gandhi himself said, "The weak can never forgive. Forgiveness is an attribute of the strong." Howard Thurman, in his eloquent way, said this. He said, "There's a certain grandeur and nobility in administering to another's need out of one's fullness and plenty, because we are all one." And Dr. King understood Gandhi's approach, because that's where Dr. King learned this approach of nonviolent resistance. And he said, darkness cannot drive out darkness. Only light can do that. Hate cannot drive out hate. Only love can do that. And the practical side that Dr. King understood, he said, injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. So we have this powerful way that we can bring the life of spirit into everything that we do. And we can stand in power, level our ego as Gandhi did, and return hate with love, with powerful love. And return condemnation with absolutely power, respect, and the power comes from our oneness. And there's also, to close, I wanted to quote some scripture from a song that I like. And how many of you were here at the installation? So the first song that you heard, my dear friend, Reverend Carol Lotz, sang with all the passion and her great voice, was a song about Jewel called Life Uncommon. And for me, this story, for me, what's important in my ministry is championing the cause of freedom, freedom in ourselves and freedom to help others. And these are the words that are so meaningful from that song, because this is the story of our freedom, of our time of bringing God into the battlefield. It goes like this: I've heard your anguish, I've heard your hearts cry out. Set down your chains until only faith remains. Lend your voices only to sounds of freedom. No longer lend your strength to that which you wish to be free from. There's a new army coming, and we are armed with faith. To live, we must give. And it ends like this: fill your lives with love and bravery, and we shall live a life uncommon. So that's my wish for you today, is to take this concept of justice and bring the power and the presence of that divine that you are, and go do that battle, but go do it from on high. And I guarantee you our lives will change if you do that. Thank you.